You're looking at the worst of the worst. Hardened criminals locked up in a prison near Moscow. But if you're recruiting for the brutal Wagner group, these are the best of the best. The man you see speaking in this grainy, clandestine footage is Wagner leader Yevgeny Prigozhin.
70%! Шойгу!
He's hoping to convince these thugs to take on a new fight in Ukraine. And that
On June 24th, Russian President Vladimir Putin faced the most serious challenge to his power in his 23-year-long rule. Surprisingly, the challenge came from within his regime, when the famously volatile Wagner Group chief Yevgeny Prigozhin seized control of the headquarters of the Russian Southern Military District in Rostov-on-Don, advanced on Moscow and shot down military aircraft along the way. Amid the chaos of Russia's brief uprising, an unlikely figure emerged to take credit for calming the spiraling situation. Alexander Lukashenko, the president of Belarus and often called Europe's last dictator, has been ruling one of the world's most authoritarian regimes since the mid-1990s. In this modern Russian drama, it was surprising casting for the role of rational mediator and Kremlin counterweight. Prigozhin portrayed the rebellion as a response to an alleged attack on his forces by the ministry and refused to integrate Wagner Group into the Russian armed forces. While Prigozhin has been supporting the Russian invasion of Ukraine, he had previously publicly criticized Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu and Chief of the General Staff Valery Gerasimov, blaming Shoigu for the country's military shortcomings and accused him of handing over Russian territories to Ukraine. During the rebellion, Prigozhin demanded that they be turned over to him. In a televised address on the 24th of June, Russian President Vladimir Putin called Wagner mercenaries, patriots, while also denouncing their actions as treason and pledging to quell the rebellion. Prigozhin's forces successfully took control of Rostov-on-Don and the headquarters of the Southern Military District in it. They then advanced towards Moscow in an armored column. In the early 2000s, Prigozhin, having served a decade in prison before embarking on an entrepreneurial path, emerged as a prominent figure in St. Petersburg's business landscape, gaining recognition for a string of highly regarded restaurants. This connection eventually facilitated a financial association with Putin, who was actively engaged in municipal politics during that period. Prigozhin gradually evolved into a trusted and intimate confidant of Putin, forging a close personal bond. In 2014, Prigozhin founded the Wagner Group, a Russian private military company. Despite the legal prohibition of private military companies in Russia, Wagner operated unimpeded with implicit endorsement from the government. Many analysts have said that the government employed the services of the Wagner Group to allow for plausible deniability and to obscure the actual toll in terms of casualties and financial costs of Russia's foreign interventions. Serving as a tool of Russian foreign and military policy, the Wagner Group emerged as a formidable combat force in various regions, including the Donbass conflict. It played a significant role during Russia's military intervention in the Syrian civil war, providing support to Syrian President Bashar al-Assad, and has participated in conflicts in Mali, Libya, and the Central African Republic. Wagner has garnered infamy due to its ruthless methods and its participation in war crimes throughout Africa, the Middle East, and Ukraine, perpetrating atrocities with impunity. Since 1999, Belarus and Russia have been linked in the so-called Union State of Russia and Belarus, that's based on a treaty from 1997. But Lukashenko has tried to maintain a degree of autonomy from Putin in the past. But Lukashenko has been more reliant on Putin since the summer of 2020, perhaps even earlier. Back then, after rigged presidential elections, Lukashenko faced massive popular protests. Thousands demanded his resignation, but the Kremlin stood by Lukashenko with loans and the announcement of a possible intervention. Lukashenko brutally crushed the democratic protests, whose leaders were arrested or forced into exile. Lukashenko looks like a tactical winner and Putin looks weakened, which is something extraordinary. Lukashenko did a service for his boss in Moscow, but by saving Putin, he also saved himself. The Belarusian president showed Western diplomats he could negotiate with Putin, proving he has some autonomy left. This does not change the fact that Lukashenko remains highly dependent on Russia. 70% of Belarus's exports are sent to Russia and 90% of Belarusian exports depend on Russian infrastructure. Russia has agreed to sell its gas to Belarus at the lowest prices in the world. Belarus is fundamentally dependent on Russia and this trajectory will continue. No amount of mediation skills can change that. There are contradictory interests between Yevgeny Prigozhin, Alexander Lukashenko and Vladimir Putin. Prigozhin wants to maintain control over Wagner as an autonomous and independent entity, but Lukashenko wants to avoid this because he knows Wagner troops can turn against him, the same way they turned against Putin. Yet converging interests exist as well. The Belarusian leader has said his own army could benefit from the experience of Wagner troops. Before, Wagner was operating as a de facto branch of the Russian army even though Russian law labels private militaries as illegal. Finally, Lukashenko can use the Wagner soldiers to defend himself. The Kastus Kalinowski Regiment is a group of Belarusian opposition volunteers, which have been fighting in Ukraine on Kyiv's side. They have claimed that once they liberate Ukraine from Russian occupation, they intend to liberate Belarus from Lukashenko's rule. Little is known about the relationship between Lukashenko and Prigozhin. But the Belarusian president has certainly experienced his own conflict with the Wagner group. In July 2020, shortly before the much contested presidential elections in Belarus, 33 fighters, allegedly members of the Wagner group, were arrested there because they seemed to be behaving in a way that would destabilize the situation, local authorities said. Later on it appeared the arrests were the result of an operation by the Ukrainian Secret Service. After 2 weeks, the men were released and deported back to Russia. There are few details about the negotiations that took place between Lukashenko and Prigozhin, including whether Prigozhin will remain in Belarus for the long term or go abroad.